Earth right now. You send your manuscript to mainstream publishers and they say, Palestine, lovely, but when they read it, not so lovely. Because if you do not reflect a certain viewpoint, your work is not going to see the light of day. And this is why I want to pay tribute to people like Dr. Muhammad Yunus Yassin, to Sadiq Ahmad, who's always behind the scenes. He still owes us a speech. He's going to give us a speech one of these days. And to Fahim helping behind the scenes as well, but particularly to Dr. Yunus, who's had the vision, the guts, and the courage to go ahead with projects like this. I want you to give Dr. Yunus and his team a special round of applause. Then, of course, to my publishers in South Africa, Dome, who've also had the guts, and to another foundation called the Car Trust in Cape Town, which is run by a man called Dr. Anwar Nagia, who does a tremendous amount of philanthropical work, it's a long word, in South Africa. So a special thank you to all those people. If I've forgotten anybody's name in terms of thanking you, I apologize. You can come and hit me after the presentation. When I heard about the main event, I actually thought it was the food. But in the meantime, I will quickly do a presentation. I've decided that I would rather show you pictures. I can sit and talk until tomorrow morning about Palestine. But if I show you some images, it can enhance and strengthen what, for example, Chuan said, Akbar has said, what Dr. Zuleika has said. I'm sure you'll understand the situation even deeper. And if you perhaps come from the Middle East of Palestine, I'm sure it will serve as a reminder of what that experience is still like. I'm going to try and multitask. I'm a male, it's quite difficult. Right, my Palestinian journey. Just a quick comment about this picture. You may notice that the haram, the sanctuary, is empty. And this is possibly one of the saddest things about Jerusalem nowadays, is that not enough people visit it. And something that I've been told to bring back to countries like Malaysia and South Africa from people that I know there is they say, please, if it is in any way possible, that people must come and visit Palestine. Because when the Israeli authorities see the haram empty, it makes it so much easier for them to dig underneath it. It's easier for them to put soldiers inside it. It's easier for them to do the things that they like to do. And the plea that I've had is that please come and visit Jerusalem. One doesn't have to say anything about the apartheid wall. Very briefly, it's 5 meters higher than the old Berlin Wall. The length of the West Bank is just over 300 kilometers, and yet the apartheid wall is 600. It's double. It's 600. Very simple. The policy is to have as much land as possible with as little Palestinians on it. And by creating this wall and surrounding villages like Qalqilia and Tulkarem, and cutting Palestinians off from their farmlands, you can expropriate as much land as you want. That's basically one of the underlying principles of this wall. The Israeli authorities say it's for security reasons. It's much, much more than that. They say a picture tells 1,000 words. And this one certainly does. It shows the continual erosion of Palestinian territory. If you look at the map on your left, this is 1947, just after the Second World War, when most of the land was still Palestinian, although fairly aggressive settlement had already started. If you look at the partition plan, the second map, which is 1947, I'm just going to quickly show you. Can you see that little circle there? That is Jaffa, and right next door to Jaffa is Tel Aviv, which became the capital and the main embarkation point for Zionists. After the 1948 war, you can see here we have the 1967 borders. These are the borders, incidentally, that Palestinians are asking for. I think that it's more than reasonable in terms of political compromise. Look at how much less 1967 territories are, even to this map here, which is 1947. The 1947 map was quite clever in the sense that there's northern Galilee, so you have a corridor coming into the West Bank, then you have another corridor that takes you into Gaza, and then Gaza stretches all the way into Egypt. All of this is part of Sinai now. But look at what you've got left here. That section there is the most crowded place on the face of this earth. 1.5 to 2 million people crammed to that small little piece of land. This is what's left of the West Bank over there. And this is why in South Africa we understand the word Bantustan, because that's what South Africa ultimately looked like before the fall of apartheid. In South Africa, 80% of the people were forced onto less than 10% of the land. In Palestine, you've got 50% of the population forced onto about the same, even less percentage of land. The West Bank is about, has been eroded by about 80% in real terms. So I just want you to think about this map, because I think this map will be the most profound thing you'll see all day. You see a lot of arguments for a two-state solution. Please count all those little dots. How many states are we going to have? This kind of picture is something you do not see very much anymore, because one thing that is being stolen as well, one thing that colonialism does, and this is one thing we learned from South Africa, is that colonialism and apartheid steals your history. It robs you of identity, and it tries to turn you into something else. And one of the biggest problems today for what I call Palestinian Israelis, Palestinians who live inside Israel per se, is that they are fast losing their identity, because the Israeli authorities want to Israelize them rather than allow them to be Arabs. And this kind of picture is something of the past. Something that I didn't talk a lot about in the book, but something that is becoming very relevant right now, is that the Palestinian situation is not confined to Palestine. The Palestinian war is fought out in places like Lebanon. Certain aspects of it are even being played out in Syria today. You find that Jordan suffers, all the neighboring states suffer, but nobody has suffered more than the people of Lebanon. And this was during the 2006 war. That was a 10-story building that was bombed by something called a smart bomb. I'm sure you're all aware of the massacres in Sabra and Shatila. This again is the legacy of Zionism, that in the two camps of Sabra and Shatila, after the 1982 war, we had this particular massacre that was discovered by journalists such as Robert Fisk. Parts of Sabra and Shatila haven't been repaired since then. I want to point out something that is interesting here. To some people it might be quite a boring picture. It's people looking through a metal door, but there are bullet holes. That bullet hole there is, oh sorry, let me just go back. Okay, the bottom bullet hole is an armor, it's an armor-piercing bullet that has done that. But it's something that just really upsets me. What would possess a soldier in a civilian area to shoot armor-piercing bullets at a door where a person's face or head is going to be appearing? It's a headshot. And there are huge, huge questions here in terms of international law, in terms of shooting at civilian targets. But what strikes me, and we visited this family, is that why was the IDF firing at the head or the face? This house had nothing to do with the conflict in Bethlehem in 2001, in 2002, 2000. That was what was left of the Palestinian Authority headquarters after the 2000 Intifada. Again, it doesn't make sense. Why do you go and bomb the infrastructure of an authority that you're supposed to be dealing with? It also doesn't make sense. But if you understand the bigger picture, what makes sense is that you are dealing with a belligerent authority that does not want to see any progress in any kind of peace process. I don't want to see that at all. The car gives you the height and the scale of the size of the apartheid wall. This is the wall in a Palestinian village or town called Abu Dis, which is very close to Jerusalem. These people from certain parts of this place, you can actually see Al-Aqsa. They can hear the adhan of Al-Aqsa, but they cannot pray in it, they cannot make salah, because they are classified as being on the West Bank. I write about this particular man. He's from Bethlehem, very young man, and he's young, in his 30s. He was in Bethlehem during the Intifada, and he went out to buy bread, and there was a curfew, so the Israelis said, right, between Maghrib and Isha, you can go and buy food at the shop. And he went to buy food at the shop, and in a lot of the Palestinian towns and villages, the khubz, the bread, it's circular, and it's in blue packets. And he was walking with 2 packets of bread, and a group of soldiers stopped him, and they told him, lift up your arms, please, because they wanted to see whether he was carrying a suicide belt. He lifted up his arms, and they shot him dead in the street. We often forget that Palestine, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron or Khalil are places not only of the Muslim faith, but they have significance in Christianity and in Judaism. And the Church of the Nativity is also believed to be in the birthplace of Nabi Dawud, or the Prophet David, peace and blessings on him. And so I think we have to bear in mind that the significance of Palestine and Jerusalem, there is a religious aspect to it, yes, but we're also dealing with a political, a humanitarian, and an issue about land as well. The Dome of the Rock is a target of many different groupings. The Temple Mount Faithful group, for example, want to demolish this, destroy this, to build the so-called Third Jewish Temple on exactly the same site. And the Al-Aqsa Haram and the Dome of the Rock are under constant pressure all the time. Israelis have been digging underneath the Haram since 1967, to the extent where Al-Aqsa is in danger of collapsing. And if you go to old parts of the Silwan neighborhood in Jerusalem, the buildings are starting to crack and fall because there's so many tunnels underneath them. The tall buildings you see in the background, that is the beginnings of one of the biggest settlements in Jerusalem. Now it's Male Adumin or something they call it. My Hebrew doesn't exist. Jerusalem is completely encircled by settlements, completely encircled by them, which is a deliberate policy. You encircle the city with the settlements, and then you build all the way into the old city. It's another means of occupation. Historically, the modern Al-Aqsa is a very small building compared to the old Umayyad structure, and the pillars in the front represent what used to be the size of the old mosque. There was an earthquake in about the 12th or 13th centuries, and the old Umayyad mosque collapsed, and a new one was built in its place of slightly smaller size. The whole of the Haram in Jerusalem it's the whole place itself is just flowing with history. Wherever you go, there's a building of significance. There's a madrasa, there's a tomb, or there's a dome commemorating the